So, what makes a civilization truly endure? I mean, really last? Is it the huge monuments we see, or maybe military power?
Or perhaps something else entirely,
Yeah.
something more foundational.
Exactly. Something written into the very way people lived, shaping everything. Well, today our deep dive takes us way back, thousands of years, and this is custom tailored from the fantastic historical and archaeological insights you shared with us. We're heading to ancient Mesopotamia. We're going to unravel the story of Babylon's, well, dramatic rise, and the huge legacy of its most famous ruler, Hammurabi.
It's a fascinating journey back in time.
Our mission today is pretty clear. We want to meticulously pull out the most important bits of knowledge, the surprising facts, and those moments where you just go, hmm. We're digging deep into this rich material you've given us. It's a journey to understand how this, well, seemingly small city became a regional powerhouse.
A real heavyweight.
Yeah. We'll start with Babylon's early days, its humble beginnings. Then look at Hammurabi's reign, how strategic it was, how it reshaped everything. Then we'll really dive into the Code of Hammurabi, that groundbreaking legal system. We'll look at its impact socially, economically.
Huge impacts.
Definitely. And finally, we'll explore Babylon's lasting influence, its cultural and political legacy that went far beyond Hammurabi himself.
And for you, our listener, especially if you're looking to get a solid grasp of things quickly but thoroughly, this dive offers, well, a unique window. What's really compelling here, I think, is how the foundations of things we see today, governance, law, even how cities are planned, you can trace them right back to this era.
It's incredible, isn't it?
It really is. This isn't just some old story. It's like a blueprint for understanding how societies develop, how power works, and the absolutely critical role law plays in it all. And we'll definitely uncover some surprising complexities in the sources you provided, especially around ideas like justice. What did that even mean back then?
Right. Not quite what we think of today.
Exactly. So prepare to maybe rethink some things as we get into the layers of Babylonian society and its legal world.
Okay, so to really get Babylon's rise, we need to set the scene first. Mesopotamia, early 2nd millennium BCE. Picture this vast, fertile area, kind of nestled between, or really, born from the Euphrates and Tigris rivers.
The land between the rivers.
Precisely. And this wasn't just any piece of land. It was, and had been for ages, the absolute cultural, economic, political heart of the ancient world. The sources really paint this picture of incredible richness, especially for farming. The rivers flooding, depositing all that fertile silt.
Made it an agricultural powerhouse.
Yeah,
Capable of supporting huge populations.
absolutely. But the rivers, they were more than just food providers, weren't they?
Oh, definitely. They were the highways of the ancient world. Think easy transport for goods, people, ideas, connecting everyone.
Like the original interstates, yeah, facilitating complex trade networks.
And it's this perfect mix. Fertile land, water, easy transport. That's why the first city-states popped up here. Sumerians, Akkadians.
They were the pioneers, laying down the administrative, the legal groundwork that influenced later groups.
Right. And even before Babylon really took off, you had powerful states like Elam to the east, Assyria up north.
Plus loads of smaller, independent city-states, all with their own rulers, their own ambitions.
Exactly. So it's this constantly shifting puzzle of power, alliances forming, breaking.
Rivalries were just the norm, political instability, constant conflict. The map was always changing.
A very dynamic, often chaotic environment, ripe for a strong, unifying force, you could say, if one could actually emerge.
Which brings us to Babylon itself. In this whole chaotic picture, where did it fit in initially?
Well, that's the fascinating part. In its earliest phases, Babylon was really a minor player, truly. The sources show it was just one city-state among many. Not a major economic hub, not a cultural heavyweight yet.
Not like Uruk with its ancient history or Ashur with its military reputation.
It's exactly. Kind of an underdog, really. But despite starting small, it had these key geographic advantages. Maybe latent, but there. Its location, right on the Euphrates. That was critical. It controlled a vital artery for trade and communication.
Connecting the farming south with the markets in the north. Huge logistical advantage.
And it wasn't just on the river. It was at a key crossroads for overland routes, too. Gave it an economic edge.
Plus the farmland around it was incredibly rich.
Which meant potential for food surplus, population growth, and a stronger economy.
So compared to its rivals, it had this potential, right, for military strength, economic growth.
It did. But it wasn't a guaranteed win. Not at all. In those early days, Babylon, like other small states, faced a lot of pressure, sometimes dominance from stronger neighbors. You had the Elamites from the east, the Assyrians north, Mari on the middle, Euphrates controlling trade.
Formidable opponents. Babylon was often in their shadow.
Definitely. Which leads to the big question, doesn't it? Given all these challenges, its initial minor status, what allowed it to break through? How did it start that remarkable climb?
That really is the core question. And the answer seems to lie in this fascinating interplay between that geography we talked about and, well, human ingenuity.
It wasn't just being on the river.
No, exactly. The early Babylonians, even before Hammurabi, they amplified those natural gifts through some pretty sophisticated engineering. The sources talk a lot about developing advanced irrigation systems, complex canal networks.
Right, controlling those floods wasn't easy. It required massive collective effort, building dikes, dams, digging and maintaining canals.
It was a huge undertaking, a civilization-defining project, really. And this led directly to a massive increase in agricultural output, consistent surplus.
And a food surplus changes everything, doesn't it?
It really does. It fuels population growth, more people, more labor. It allows for specialized skills to develop.
Which then leads to more diverse economic activity.
Yeah.
New markets, artisans, more demand for goods.
So this initial rise, it wasn't just politics or luck. It was this multi-layered process. Geography provided the base.
Economic resources grew from that.
And the social structure evolved to manage it all. New administration, new labor systems.
Like all the pieces started clicking into place, setting the stage for something really extraordinary.
And that brings us perfectly to the man who seized that potential, Hammurabi. He takes the throne in 1792 BCE.
And it's crucial to remember, like you said, Babylon wasn't a regional power yet.
Not at all. It had potential, yes. Strategic location, growing agriculture, but it hadn't been fully realized on the big stage. It was still just one contender.
But Hammurabi's leadership, that changed everything. He steered Babylon onto this path, and within decades, it became the most powerful state in Mesopotamia.
And his rise wasn't just about, being charismatic, though I'm sure he was, or one lucky battle.
No, the sources suggest it was much more deliberate, a strategic state policy, a systematic project of centralization.
His goal was incredibly ambitious. Unite all those independent, often warring city-states into one single centralized kingdom under Babylon.
Just think about the sheer nerve needed to even attempt that in such a fractured region, where local rulers clung to their power.
A massive challenge. So how did he pull it off?
That's the key, isn't it?
Yeah.
How did he achieve such a radical shift so relatively quickly? Well, his policies were multifaceted, very sophisticated. He understood power had many levers. First, obviously, military campaigns. He launched calculated, successful wars against major rivals.
Like the conquest of Mari, that was huge.
Exactly. Mari controlled crucial north-south trade routes on the Euphrates. But these conquests weren't just about grabbing land. They had a clear dual purpose. First, gain direct control of those vital trade routes, the economic arteries. Second, seize rich farmland to feed his growing empire.
Controlling trade meant taxes, directing wealth to Babylon. Controlling food meant stability.
Precisely. But Hammurabi wasn't just a general. He was also a master diplomat. He played rivals against each other brilliantly. He didn't just conquer. He built complex relationships with the different groups in his new territories.
So making alliances when it suited him.
Right. Offering help to one state against another, then maybe weakening that ally later if they got too strong or weren't useful anymore.
It sounds like a high-stakes game of chess.
Absolutely. It wasn't just brute force. It was a sophisticated geopolitical game, juggling alliances and rivalries to Babylon's ultimate advantage. This mix of military power and shrewd diplomacy was key to his consolidation.
And that's where his real genius seems to come in, right? Moving beyond just winning battles to actually building the state.
Yes, he knew conquest wasn't enough for lasting power. You needed a solid administrative structure, a centralized one.
So he focused on strengthening the state's central authority, taking power away from local rulers.
Exactly. He wasn't interested in loose control. He wanted direct influence, and he used specific tools to get it. He started implementing new laws even before the famous code to standardize things across his lands.
Administrative reforms, too, like putting his own people in charge.
Yes, replacing local officials with centrally appointed ones in key positions, ensuring loyalty, efficiency.
And setting up bureaucracy, standardizing things.
Definitely. A whole web of regulations, standard taxes, unified weights and measures, consistent record keeping. It streamlined everything. He limited the power of local rulers, not just with soldiers, but by creating this royal bureaucracy that often bypassed them.
In managing resources effectively, royal lands, granaries.
hmm Plus, he was sharp economically. He kept pushing agricultural production, supporting those irrigation systems we talked about earlier.
Building on that foundation.
He understood economic strength was just as vital as military strength, maybe more so in the long run.
So he was this combination, a tough warrior and a brilliant administrator.
Truly. Grounding Babylon's power in military might, economic prosperity, and sophisticated central control. He really built it from the ground up, methodically.
So what was the end result of all this for the region?
The result was, well, a total transformation of Mesopotamia's political map. Babylon went from being relatively minor to the undisputed top dog.
The dominant power.
Absolutely. It wasn't just a conqueror. It took on political, economic, and cultural leadership over cities that once looked down on it.
And this unification process he orchestrated, it shaped the future, didn't it?
Profoundly. It set precedents for centralized rule, completely changed the balance of power. No longer just a bunch of squabbling cities, now a clear leader. It's just a powerful example of how one leader's vision and relentless execution on multiple fronts, military, economic, administrative, can completely redefine a civilization.
Which leads us perfectly to perhaps its most famous legacy, the Code of Hammurabi.
Ah, yes, the code.
And this isn't just some dusty old document. The sources frame it as one of the oldest and most incredibly comprehensive written legal texts we have from the ancient world. Dates to the mid-18th century BCE, right when Babylon was at its absolute peak.
And its purpose went beyond just listing rules, right?
Far beyond. It was a powerful statement by the state, asserting authority, standardizing law, ensuring order across this newly unified, diverse kingdom, vital for holding it all together.
But the really revolutionary part, the thing that blows my mind,
Was that it was public, carved on those huge stone statues.
it's exactly displayed prominently in city centers, near temples maybe. Why was that so radical?
Because it meant, in theory at least, the laws weren't secret knowledge held by priests or scribes. Everyone could see them.
Fostering awareness, compliance.
Yeah, imagine walking through your city and seeing the laws right there in stone. It makes the king's authority tangible, visible, not just force, but decree.
A physical manifestation of the rule of law, even if that law wasn't applied equally to everyone.
We'll definitely get to that, but the sheer scope of it first.
It's astonishing. The code has 282 articles, or laws, and they cover, well, pretty much everything about life back then.
It wasn't just random rules.
No, it was incredibly systematic, almost like an ancient instruction manual for society.
Covering what kinds of things?
Oh, you name it, crime and punishment, obviously, but also trade, contracts, loans, deposits, partnerships, detailed rules for all that.
Yeah.
When you have debt, property rights, family law, marriage, divorce, inheritance, labor rights, slavery, and crucially, agriculture and irrigation.
Reflecting the economy's foundation.
Absolutely. It usually had a structure, too. A prologue praising Hammurabi and the gods, the laws themselves, often in that if-then format, and an epilogue with blessings and curses.
A complete package. But you mentioned slavery, different aspects of society. How did it account for the social structure, the different classes?
That's a critical question. It brings us right to the most famous bit, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, lex talionis.
The idea of proportionate punishment.
Right. The punishment should, in theory, match the crime. A step towards rationality compared to, say, blood feuds. If you hurt someone, you get hurt similarly.
There's a big but, isn't there, based on social class.
A huge but. And the code itself reveals this structure. Babylonian society was rigidly layered. You had the Owilu nobles, high-status free citizens, the Mushkinu commoners, lower-status free people, maybe dependents, and the Wardu slaves.
3 distinct tiers. So how did eye for an eye work across those tiers?
It varied dramatically. For instance, if one Owilu injured another Owilu, the penalty might well be lex talionis, the same injury inflicted back.
Okay, seems straightforward there.
But if an Owilu injured a Mushkinu, the penalty was often just a fine paid to the Mushkinu. No physical punishment for the noble.
So the status mattered hugely. And for injuring a slave,
Even less severe, usually a smaller fine paid to the slave's owner because the slave was considered property.
wow. So proportionality was there, but heavily skewed by who you were and who the victim was.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It clearly shows those rigid class lines. And it tells us the main goal wasn't modern justice or equality. It was about maintaining the existing social order, the hierarchy.
Keeping things stable within that structure.
Precisely. It's a stark reminder that justice meant something very different back then. It was about preserving the system they had, inequalities and all.
Fascinating. But the code wasn't just about crime and social order, was it? You mentioned the economy.
Right, and this is crucial. The code was also a vital economic tool. It shows a really practical understanding of what made the empire tick. The sources highlight specific rules for economic relationships designed to build trust and make trade easier.
Like rules for contracts.
Exactly. Making agreements for trade, loans, partnerships binding and clear. Rules for debt repayment, interest rates, what happens if you default, trying to prevent instability.
And rules for guarantees. Protecting merchants.
Yes, surety and guarantees, all designed to create predictability and fairness in business deals. This directly helped Babylon's trade grow across huge distances.
And agriculture, too. You said it covered that in detail.
Oh, absolutely. Given its importance, the code had meticulous regulations for farming, things like maintaining irrigation canals, a shared duty, defining land boundaries.
Penalties for negligence. Like letting your ox wreck a neighbor's field.
Yes, specific penalties for things like that, or for failing to maintain your part of an irrigation channel. It underlines just how vital agriculture was. It shows this deep understanding that the empire's wealth, its very survival, depended on productive land. Law and practical economics were completely intertwined.
Okay, so let's try and unpack the overall impact of this code. On society, on the economy.
Well, fundamentally, it was about establishing social order, making justice work across this big, diverse kingdom.
And managing those rigid social classes we talked about.
Right, not erasing the classes, but regulating how people within and between those classes interacted. Everyone knew their place, their obligations.
But again, reminding ourselves, justice here means preserving that order, maintaining stability.
Exactly. Keeping the status quo, even if it was unequal by our standards. It was vital for managing such a large, complex, newly centralized empire, preventing chaos.
And you mentioned the agricultural regulations being key.
Hugely key. It directly tackled one of Mesopotamia's biggest, most constant challenges, managing the rivers and the farmland. The code specified shared responsibility for maintaining canals, ensuring fair water distribution. Why?
Because everything depended on it.
Everything. The continuity, the productivity of farming. Bad management meant failed crops, unproductive land, economic crisis, maybe even famine and unrest.
So the law was directly enabling economic survival.
Absolutely. A powerful example of law as a pragmatic tool for prosperity. The empire's stability literally rested on enforcing those farming rules.
And this attention to detail extended to trade, too.
It did. Those rules about contracts, debts, guarantees, they built trust, made people more willing to do business, even long distance.
So it boosted internal trade, helped integrate the cities economically.
Yes. And don't forget Hammurabi's overall control. The protection of trade routes was also part of it. The code, plus his centralized power, made commerce relatively secure.
So it wasn't just local rules, it secured the economic arteries of the empire.
Exactly, allowing goods, wealth, ideas to flow more freely and predictably. This strengthened Babylon's economic dominance immensely. It became a magnet for trade.
And the code reached into personal life, too. Family, social relations.
Deeply. It regulated family law meticulously. Marriage, for example, was often a contract involving dowries and bride prices. Divorce was possible, with financial provisions for the woman, especially if she wasn't at fault. Inheritance rules were strict, usually favoring sons, but widows and sometimes daughters had rights.
What about women's rights generally? You mentioned property.
Yes, women could own and manage property. In a divorce, they often kept their dowry. It wasn't equality as we know it, but it was a recognition of their economic stake, giving some financial independence. Progressive for the time, in some ways.
But slaves were at the bottom, legally property.
Definitely. Slavery was just an accepted part of the economy and society. Household labor, farming, public works. The code offered slaves minimal protections, like rules about marrying free people, but their fundamental status as property was unchanged.
Which raises that recurring question, doesn't it? Balancing order versus individual rights, especially when rights are so unequal.
A constant tension throughout history. How do societies manage that?
And Hammurabi seems to have managed it partly by emphasizing his divine connection, cementing his rule beyond just law and force.
Absolutely. He was brilliant at political legitimization. He didn't just present himself as a king, he was the god's representative on earth. Specifically Marduk, Babylon's patron god, whose status he elevated hugely,
A common tactic in Mesopotamia, but he used it effectively.
incredibly effectively, ruling by divine mandate. It reinforced his authority massively, with the public and his own officials. Defying the king meant defying the gods.
Like that image on the stele, receiving the laws from the sun god Shamash.
Exactly. A masterstroke of political branding, linking his rule to the divine will.
And this stability under Hammurabi, it led to more than just political order, right? A cultural flourishing.
Oh, definitely. It was a golden age culturally. Huge architectural projects, temples like the Esagila for Marduk, grand palaces, massive city walls. These weren't just power symbols, though they were that. They were active centers of economic and religious life. Temples were huge landowners, major economic players themselves.
Managing resources, workshops, lending.
And beyond buildings, there were big advances intellectually. Writing saw refinement, sophisticated literature emerged, epics, wisdom texts.
Mathematics, too, that base 60 system.
Yes, crucial for calculations in surveying, building, accounting, and astronomy detailed observations, leading to better calendars, omen interpretations.
So the security and resources from his strong rule created the space for this.
Precisely. It allowed scholars, scribes, artisans to thrive. It shows a holistic vision of empire, not just conquest, but fostering culture and knowledge, too.
And this cultural vibrancy, the legal system, it helped spread Babylon's influence.
It did. His legal framework, the political order, it increased interaction with other cultures, trade, diplomacy, cultural exchange with other Mesopotamian cities and beyond.
We see evidence of treaties, letters, scholars moving around.
Yes, so Babylon's rise under Hammurabi cemented its status as this incredibly influential city for centuries, even after him.
It became a beacon, drawing people, ideas, wealth in.
Exactly. A hub of power and culture. Its laws, its administration, its literature, they left a huge mark on the ancient Near East, influencing later empires long after Hammurabi was gone.
But even the best systems face challenges, right? What happened after Hammurabi died?
Well, that's the classic story, isn't it? His successors really struggled to maintain the complex system he'd built. That centralized power started to fray, internal strife increased, maybe local rulers trying to get power back, succession disputes.
And external threats returned.
Yes, neighbors like the Kassites from the mountains started pressing in again. The regional balance shifted. Babylon couldn't hold on to that peak strength.
So a gradual decline from that high point?
A gradual decline in dominance, yes. The challenge of succession, the difficulty of maintaining such a tightly controlled empire without its architect. It's a familiar pattern in history.
And that decline was hit by a sudden shock, wasn't it? That Hittite invasion.
A huge shock. Around 1595 BCE, the Hittites from Anatolia under King Rizalisli launched this completely unexpected raid.
Caught Babylon totally off guard. A major turning point.
Absolutely. It wasn't a long occupation, but it was devastating. They sacked the city, plundered its wealth. Crucially, they took the statue of Marduk, the patron god.
A massive symbolic blow.
Huge. It shook Babylon's political structure, weakened its regional dominance significantly, and opened the door for others, like the Kassites, to eventually take control.
Imagine the shockwaves. The supposedly invincible city, sacked by a distant enemy.
It really damaged their prestige and power. Babylon entered a period of weakness, instability. It took a long time to recover.
So with all that turmoil, the invasion, the changing rulers, what happened to Hammurabi's code? Did it just vanish?
That's the amazing thing. No, it didn't. Babylon itself continued to exist for centuries, often under foreign rule, Kassites, Assyrians, but it endured. And crucially, the code of Hammurabi endured too. Despite the political chaos, it kept being copied, studied, used as a legal reference, not just in Babylon, but elsewhere in Mesopotamia.
Its influence lasted beyond the empire that created it.
Profoundly. Its principles, its structure, its comprehensive approach. It formed the basis for legal thinking and lawmaking in later periods across the Near East.
Which raises that fascinating question. How does a legal document transcend its own time and place like that? Surviving conquest, political change?
It speaks to something fundamental, doesn't it? The human need for order, for clear rules, for some system of justice, however flawed it might seem to us now. Its practicality and comprehensiveness gave it lasting power.
So wrapping this up for you, our listener, this deep dive has taken us on quite a journey. From Babylon's obscure beginnings around 1800 BCE.
All the way to that pivotal Hittite raid around 1595 BCE.
Yeah. We saw how this small city became a powerhouse, mainly through Hammurabi's visionary, pragmatic leadership. We looked at his smart military moves, his economic foresight, and, of course, the incredible Code of Hammurabi.
That groundbreaking legal text.
We saw how the code was crucial for social order, for regulating the economy, making it the most systematic legal text of its time. This whole period under Hammurabi really laid the foundation for Babylon's rise, politically, economically, culturally. A major turning point in Mesopotamian history.
And if we just connect this to the bigger picture for a final thought, the story of Babylon and Hammurabi, it's more than just ancient history, isn't it? It's this profound case study. The power of one individual to reshape society using force, strategy, and especially the rule of law. Think about it. Those same pillars, military strength, economic policy, a unified legal system, they still define states and empires today, thousands of years later. So what aspects of Hammurabi's approach, his focus on written law and centralization, what aspects do you think still echo in our modern efforts to create order and justice, even as our own ideas about what justice actually means have evolved so dramatically? Something to ponder.